and welcome in to another edition of GC Live Fowl Balls. Going to be a lot of off-season rumors going on. The transfer portal, obviously, coaching staff changes, and plenty more has transpired since we were last with you. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, the godfather of greatness, the man, the myth, the legend, Collyn Taylor. Collyn, how are we this fine Wednesday evening?
I have decided to put myself on low power mode. We're tired. It's been a very, very hectic few weeks with a bunch of staff changes and all that fun stuff. But we are here. We are ready to go and kind of play catch up and recap what's been what I would like to call a frenzied few weeks for South Carolina and South Carolina baseball in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've already seen the work that Coach Kingston has already done in the transfer portal, and obviously we saw the work that he did last year. So there's plenty of moving pieces already that have already committed to South Carolina and that are still on the move, as I'm sure people who have been following along the rumor mill on Twitter and everything, there's plenty of juicy stuff to get to. And we will get to that as soon as we recap this season. We didn't have the chance to do that as soon as South Carolina season wrapped. Mike and I did it a little bit with the post-game shows throughout the postseason. Thank you guys again for tuning into those. Had a great time with that, and Mike as well. But kind of getting into it, Collyn, you want to talk about our good friend Clint Hammond before we get into things?
Absolutely. Clint Hammond is the title sponsor for everything Gamecock Central on our Gamecock Central YouTube. Fantastic. As always, you can see Clint's number up top. Clint obviously can help with the Movement Mortgage Network. So if you're looking to buy a home, if you are looking to sell a home, Clint is your man. It's a nuts process having gone through it 2 years ago. I have some friends who just bought a house recently, so they've gone through the process and seen all of it that it has to offer. So plenty going on there as you start to buy your home, and Clint is there to help you with all of it. So give Clint a call. You see his number, like we said, up top, and give him a call, and he can get you squared away and ready to go once you are ready to start that process that is buying home or selling a home. So we give a big thanks to Clint, support the people that support us, and Clint's one of those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Clint Hammond, the GOAT, title sponsor, like we said, has done a lot for us over here at Gamecock Central. Like I said, the GOAT. So Collyn, getting into it, my first question for you, was this year a success? I mean, obviously we saw a lot of success in the field compared to last year. Just give me a rundown overall. What'd you think?
Yeah, and kind of how we want to set up the show was we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about last year. Or I guess say last year. It's the season that just ended a few weeks ago. We'll kind of recap that for a minute, but we've had time to kind of sit back and break that down. But then we'll really focus on the movement on the staff, the movement in the portal, what we like, what we don't like, and just kind of recap a little bit of that. So for starters, I got to think that this program inevitably is always judged on Omaha. And if you're playing for and competing for College World Series, the first and foremost. But it's hard not to think that this year was successful in a way. When you consider where South Carolina was at the end of the 2022 season, you finish under 500 for the first time in since I believe 1996 was the last time that you finished under 500. And you do that, you have some pieces, you're banged up, but you start to get some pieces back, like a Noah Hall, a James Hicks, a Braylon Wimmer. You really do well in the transfer portal. You get your first 40-win year since 2016. You are a top 16 host for the first time since the same year, 2016. You were ranked as high as number 2 by Baseball America and 3 by D1 Baseball. And you get to a super for the first time since 2018. So anytime you have I call them sense years, Anytime you've done something since, hard not to think of that as somewhat of a success, but ultimately not where this program, the season ended prematurely for what this program wants and what this program expects, but hard to not think that it was a success and a step forward. It felt like Carolina baseball again. It felt like what it was supposed to. Packed houses, going up against top competition and holding your own. And when you do that, things fall in line, and there's a promising future as you kind of look ahead to 24, which we'll obviously talk about. But certainly, I think a very, very good step in the right direction. With still work to go. Do not get me wrong. Still work to go for South Carolina as they kind of turn the page at least into 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly think this year was a success. Obviously, you're trying to build on previous years, and I mean, since at least the pandemic, you really haven't seen that much success out of South Carolina baseball. I think this year was definitely a step in the right direction. You got your name back on the map, obviously making it to the Super Regionals and losing to a really, really, really good Florida team. I know you swept them earlier in the year, but I mean, Collyn, as well as I do, college baseball, and especially in the postseason, is all about who's hot in that Florida lineup. I mean, we knew it from the jump that they had as much firepower as they showed in Omaha, and I think we saw the full extent of what that Florida team was. They reached their potential, and so I think losing to them in the Supers in Gainesville, nonetheless, it's nothing to hold your head down on. And again, I go back to last year. You made leaps and bounds compared to where you were at last year, and also too for Coach Kingston, you saw that he has found a way to fill in roster spots in the transfer portal, and especially last year, he did it really, really, really well. I mean, I think the construction of this roster was a very good example of what Coach Kingston can do, and now that he has the backing of Monty Lee, I think it's huge, 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 huge. And obviously, we've already seen it. We'll get into that, but I definitely think this year was a success. I think it was a step in the right direction. And I know you had mentioned that Omaha is what this program is judged on, but I think a super regional for not having been to a super regional in a little while, I think that's huge. And again, you were right on the doorstep, right? You needed a couple more pieces, and obviously, I think if you had a Noah Hall in your rotation, I think it would have been a little bit of a different story. But all the teams in the tournament were dealing with injuries. But overall, yeah, I definitely think this year was a success. And I think too, it's definitely going to translate into the transfer portal as well. Guys are seeing the opportunity here, seeing that obviously the atmosphere at Founders Park is one of the best in college baseball, but also they see an opportunity to win with the coaching staff and everybody all on board. I think it's the culture is there, and guys want to be a part of that. So I think this year set up a lot for you down the road.
Yeah, there's stability might not be the right word, but there's a core more than there has been in previous years. When you talk, coming off the 2021 season where South Carolina had a really good young core pitching wise, it didn't feel the same. This, you're looking ahead to next year. Cole Messina coming back, 2 All-American level talents. You have, you have Eli Jones. You have, Roman Kimball coming off Tommy surgery, and he looked the part of a weekend guy before injury. You have Matthew Becker coming back. So you have pieces, and then obviously Chris Veach, Kate Austin can come back too. They're draft eligible, but they can certainly come back if they choose to. You have options. Like, this is a better core than what maybe you were. This is probably the best core you've had under the Mark Kingston era returning after a season. That's not to say you don't lose a ton, because you are losing a ton, but you have a good next wave of talent. The Ethan Petries, the Cole Messinas, the pitchers we just named. There's a wave coming back up that is encouraging. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have pieces to fill. You're replacing more than likely all three of your weekend starters opening weekend.
Yep.
The team's leadoff hitter in the postseason, the team's starting shortstop, and you're replacing your frontline guy in the postseason with a James Hicks, more than likely. All of this is obviously hinging on the draft and everything like that. But you're talking about a group that has a good nucleus around it. And the pieces they've added through the portal, the pieces that can potentially take the next step of Gavin Casas, the Talmadge LeCroy, those pieces tend to, that's a good, it'd be makings of a very good team. And you got to figure out some things still, but you like where this is trending coming out of a season more so than what you thought going into, they make a super in 2018, but they lose a ton off that team. Then obviously 2019 is a struggle. You don't know what happens in 2020 because the season gets cut. But then you look at 2021 and you're losing Brady Allen. You're losing Wes Clark. I believe that was right. I believe those were all junior years. You're losing Farr, Carey, Jordan. But, obviously Bosnick comes back, but really never. I don't think he pitched again in a competitive game for South Carolina. So this is probably the best core you have coming out of a season going into another. And now you just got to add the pieces around that to not only get back to where you were, but be able to take that next step to get to Omaha and get to a place where you're one of the final 8 teams in this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that piece about the core because you are returning arguably your best player, Ethan Petrie, and the spark plug in Cole Messina. And then you also have Matthew Becker coming back, Evan Stone, a really good option in the outfield as well. It's not a Foul Balls broadcast if we don't bring up Evan Stone. Go Foxes. So I love that point about the core coming back. And again, like I said, I think it's really enticing to a lot of guys who are looking at this team in the portal as a possible landing spot because the pitch is pretty simple. It's like, do you want to be that guy to join this core and be, the next superstar at South Carolina? Because there's definitely room for a couple more guys to come in and just produce and be the next Gavin Casas, be the next Braylon Wimmer, So, and it's going to be really hard to replace a guy like Braylon Wimmer. Don't get me wrong, but you guys get the gist. But it's kind of transitioning into it. Collyn, who was your offensive MVP?
It is postseason awards time, baby. We're going to kind of break it down. I think I have to scroll up to my notes. Who did I say? I said Braylon Wimmer for a lot of reasons. I should have had this pulled up first and foremost.
Yeah.
The numbers when Braylon Wimmer plays, I think they were, if you don't include the Auburn game where he left in like the 4th inning, they were 34-6 in the regular season when he started in shortstop. And take that one further, they were 34-7 including that Auburn game when he started at shortstop in the regular season. When he was starting the postseason, they won a super regional with him at shortstop. When he was playing, they go down to Florida and obviously get swept in the super, but you're talking about a guy that it was so vital to this team. And when he went, the offense went typically, as my Google spreadsheet loads. But you're talking about a guy who, in those, I'm trying to do the quick math in my head. They played 37 when he was in the lineup. It was night and day, like how much better they were with him in the lineup. And when he was hitting, they were that much better too. You're talking about a guy who was hitting well over 300 in those wins and in losses hitting below the Mendoza line. That's just what it was. And you're talking about, again, as I scroll through my Twitter spreadsheet, in losses this year, when South Carolina lost and Braylon Wimmer was in the lineup, he hit 203 overall with a 288 on base percentage and a 389 slugging percentage with 16 strikeouts to 7 walks. Those are losses. In wins, he was hitting 342, getting on base at a 450 clip, and slugging 626 with 39 strikeouts to 23 walks. So that K to walk ratio was a little bit better. his batting average on balls in play was nearly 150 points higher than in wins over losses. So you're talking about a guy that, when you say MVP, he was the most valuable guy to winning in that lineup. When you look at the wins, the splits, wins versus losses, and when that happens, it's hard not to give the offensive MVP to a guy like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I completely agree with that take. And I'm going in a different direction simply because you took Wimmer, and
yeah,
obviously the intern has to take the flashy player, and my guy is the fan favorite, Ethan Petrie. It's hard not to have this guy as your offensive MVP. He was nails all year long, SEC Freshman of the Year, I believe, and so he's just a stud. He finished the year with 83 hits, 162 total bases, 10 doubles, 23 home runs, 75 RBIs, 33 walks on the year as well. Just a stud. There's no – I mean, it's hard to have a better freshman year than that. And like I said, I think it's the fan favorite pick here. And I would have picked Wimmer because I think Wimmer has been slept on and is going to be slept on for wherever he goes next. He's drafted, correct?
More than likely,
yes.
He's going to be drafted. Yes.
Yeah.
I would anticipate Braylon signing a professional contract. Yes.
Yeah. I just wasn't sure if he had been drafted prior.
He got drafted last year from the Phillies.
Yeah.
So we'll see who drafts him this year, but I do think he's ready to go pro.
I also agree. I mean, Wimmer's a stud, and like we said, I mean, the de facto captain offensively, just great leader, great person. So
yeah, you saw the team like when he was playing.
Yes.
Yeah, like how much better he looked, like the team looked, just from a confidence standpoint more so. So not a bad pick either to go with a guy who's breaking freshman records at South Carolina. Like there's worse guys out there to. So moving on, we have 3 more of these before we get into the meat. We'll go quick. Your pitching MVP.
My pitching MVP is Matthew Becker. I wanted to pick Noah Hall, but Hall unfortunately got hurt too early for me to pick him. I think Becker is kind of, if Noah Hall's start to the year was a yin, I think Matthew Becker's finishing of the year is a yang. I think Becker, just the way he came on, not only out of the bullpen, but also just being able to turn the starter mindset on later in the year when it mattered. I think that shows me quite a lot more than kind of comparatively to what Will Sanders was able to do. Obviously, he put it together a lot towards the end of the year, but I was just a little bit more impressed with what Becker did. Absolute stud for South Carolina. He was a co-pitch of the week 2022. And so he finished the year, I'm pulling the stats up right now, finished the year 4-3 with a 4.83 ERA, played in 18 games, started 11 of them. He had 1 save through 54 innings, allowed 50 hits, 35 runs, 29 earned, 9 home runs, and 25 walks with 71 strikeouts. It's just nails from a guy that you really, really want to be a dude next year. And I think this season certainly solidified it for Becker. He's going to be a name to watch next year to be in the rotation and just be, again, one of those dudes that you rely on down the stretch out of the starting rotation and maybe even out of the bullpen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll go with a guy that I don't think South Carolina hosts without Jack Mahoney. You want to talk about an absolute horse down the stretch. Obviously had some struggles, especially in the middle there once teams kind of got to him, got some film on him and all that. But you're talking about a guy who's pitching his best late. You talk about going to Arkansas and doing what he did out there in Fayetteville, coming back and shoving against an elite Tennessee lineup. If South Carolina loses maybe either of those 2 games and ends up, I want to say that would have been 15-14 in the SEC, they might not have hosted. They might not have hosted, and who knows obviously what happens in the postseason after that, good or bad. But if Jack Mahoney came in as a guy who was expected to shoulder a lot of the load on the pitching staff and did. I think he lived up to what he was expected to do. And there were going to be bumps coming back from Tommy John, but he lived up to the billing. He flashed, and he was really good, really good, especially in that NC State game where he went out there and shoved for 5 innings before hitting a wall. People are going to remember that back half for Jack and what he did for this team. And again, I don't think they host without him. So when you talk about value, it's a guy like Jack.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's another guy that I probably would have taken.
I filled the sheet out before.
Yes, he did. So it's all good. And I think Mahoney was the clear and obvious choice for the pitching.
I'll give a shout out to James Hicks.
James Hicks, absolutely.
Any other year probably would have started. You could make the argument that he should have been starting once Noah Hall went out, but comes in and pitches lights out against Georgia in the SEC tournament and a game South Carolina. If they lose that game, they probably don't host. And then obviously goes out there, pitches really well against Central Connecticut State, and then pitches really, really, pitches well enough against Florida in that hostile of an environment.
Yeah.
So big shout out to James Hicks, who also did a pretty solid job this year as well.
To his credit as well.
Yes.
He just came on late and did what he was asked. I think that was the biggest thing for James Hicks this year. And I think he really thrived in the environment of being put into tough situations. Shout out James Hicks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go quick and do my newcomer and breakout player together. I will go newcomer of the year, Ethan Petrie. We do not need to rehash any of Ethan because we've done it. And then I'll go Talmadge, Lee Croy, or Cole Messina. Both of those guys I think deserve it. You're talking about Cole Messina. I'd probably give the edge to him just because he had an All-American level year. But you're talking about a guy who grew up wanting to play for South Carolina. Like that was he grew up in the state. He wanted to be at the big school in the state and works his butt off to get there. And for his first year really struggled for a couple reasons, and then goes and just works his tail off and hits us, what he hit. And he was such an integral part, the heart and soul of this team. And another guy you look at, he's going to be the captain of next year's team, however that works out. And South Carolina got a really good one on him. And then Talmadge LeCroy, same thing, goes out there as a freshman, gets kind of thrown to the fire, and was hitting one of the team's better hitters over the course. I would say he was one of your most consistent hitters over the course of the entire season. Some guys went through streaks here and there, but LeCroy comes out there and you kind of knew what you were going to get more often than not. A really good at-bat, a guy that could go to the opposite field and really give that lineup some length, hitting in that 6-7 hole wherever they wanted to put him, and has a chance to take another step forward for South Carolina too going into his junior year.
Yeah, I like both those picks, and I kind of stole one of them, but I'll also combine my newcomer of the year and breakout player of the year. My newcomer of the year was Gavin Casas. Obviously, his bat was a force in this lineup, transfer from Vanderbilt. Really, really big name coming in. You expected him to produce. I don't think anyone really expected him to produce as much as he did. Obviously, he was getting a lot of national attention because of his brother, what he was doing for the Red Sox. And it was kind of fun to see who outplayed each other on their respective levels. I feel like Gavin would hit a home run and then Tristan would do something crazy. So that was a lot of fun. So shout out Gavin Casas for my newcomer of the year. And then my breakout player of the year was also Cole Messina or a Matthew Becker. I think Becker, like I said, just came on and shoved. He was one of those guys that you were looking forward to this year being a year setting up this upcoming year. It's like, who is he going to be this year? What are we going to get from him? And then what are we going to leave him with a summer to get better with? Where is he going to leave at? And I think he left pretty elite, and I'm really excited to see how he comes back after this summer. I'm assuming it's going to be a lot better, and it's hard to be better than Matthew Becker right now. But and then obviously the Moose, it's hard to argue with that. I think all of South Carolina's fan base at one point have chanted or streamed the Moose is loose. Just an absolute force with his bat on the field. But it's hard to be a leader as a sophomore, but late in those games when the pitching would kind of struggle a little bit. I mean, you'd see the Moose go to the mound and just recollect things. The classic, the finish.
Yeah, that video will always live in like South Carolina lore.
It's elite. It's elite, and especially from a sophomore. I mean, you can't really teach that as a leader. And to see that, again, we've talked about how enticing this core is when you have a guy like Cole Messina being a leader. He's going to take the lead regardless. Let everyone else just dominate and do the work. I think that's really, really healthy, and I think it's what the Moose wants. I think this is, like you said, Collyn, he grew up in the state, something he's been looking forward to. And so it's going to be a really, really fun year for the Moose next year. Obviously, maybe Gamecock Central will have to get some shirts printed. But I mean, we'll think of something.
Yeah. Some NIL money towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. Get it. Maybe even get them on in the fall or something if we run a little fall
interview session. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. We'll make that happen. But yeah, the Moose is my breakout player of the year. And for good reason why. He's just a force, utter force. He's a dude. And absolutely.
Now the fun begins. Because we're going to talk big picture work in the portal. Let's run down who South Carolina has currently committed. North Florida's Austin Brinling, who hit .386 last year with a .417 batting average on balls in play. 60 runs scored, 31 RBI, and 3 homers. UNCG's Kennedy Jones, an outfielder, right-handed hitter, .357, slugged .598 with 43 RBI and 14 home runs. Then Charlotte outfielder Blake Jackson hit .277, had an OPS over .840, a .354 batting average on balls in play, 5 home runs, 28 RBIs, 46 runs scored. Presbyterian's Dalton Reeves hit 12 home runs last year, got on base at a .313 clip. Pitching-wise, Charleston righty Ty Good, .426 ERA, .132 WHIP, .212 batting average against. Struck out over a quarter of the people that he faced last year. 25.5% K rate. Virginia Tech's Tyler Dean, not the most glowing of ERA and WHIP numbers, 6.75 ERA, 2.5 WHIP, but struck out 22.7 of the batters he faced last year, which is pretty good. Liberty's Garrett Gainey, again, the ERA wasn't what it needed to be, but he was more of a two-pitch guy last year. Didn't really throw his slider a ton. That's probably his best pitch right now over the summer. He's having a really good summer. But struck out 20.6% of the batters he faced and only walked 8.4%. So strike thrower, lefty, which the South Carolina team needs. And that's I believe the committed class at the moment with a few other targets. Looming. So before we transition to talk about who South Carolina could get, plus the staffing changes and all that stuff, who do you like maybe the most? Who are 2 or 3 guys that you're really interested to see play? And all these guys are probably going to make some sort of impact next year, but who do you think makes maybe the biggest of the impacts?
Yeah, I've got 2 guys in mind, and I think it's pretty easy. I think these are kind of the easy picks, but it's really easy to see why. I think Kennedy Jones is my pick for at least a hitter to make the most impact. That kid's a stud, brings a lot of swagger, and I think he's ready to make it on the big stage. And obviously Collyn read off his stats, just an absolute stud. He rakes. And this outfield is going to be really, really dangerous when you have a hitter like Kennedy Jones next to an Ethan Petrie. And Jones can kind of play anywhere in the outfield, really, wherever you need him. Really athletic kid. And again, his bat is just elite. So I'm really excited to see what he can do. I know he's really excited to be on the SEC stage of, like South Carolina has. So really excited for Kennedy Jones. And then also Charleston righty Ty Good. Kid's pretty good, but I'm Ty, I promise, if you're watching this, I promise never to make that joke again. But
everyone gets one. Everyone gets one.
Absolutely.
Season, and you're fine.
But you talk about another guy with swagger. Ty Good brings it. Striking out a quarter of the guys he faces is just ridiculous. I'm really, really, really looking forward to seeing what he can do at South Carolina with this pitching staff, and also to just what he can bring to the dugout. I feel like a lot of these guys are really good additions to the team and chemistry and whatnot. I really haven't seen anybody that would make a difference in chemistry in a not so positive way. My last guy is Garrett Gainey. Obviously, his ERA doesn't necessarily reflect him being a dude right away, but like Collyn said, he's putting in a lot of work over the summer. You need a lefty coming from Liberty. I think there's a lot of potential. I think Garrett Gainey is my guy with one of the highest ceilings in terms of development. I'm really interested to see what he can bring in fall ball. I think that'll be kind of the true testament of where he sits compared to a Ty Good. We'll know he's going to be nails, and Kennedy Jones is just going to be really fun to watch during these fall ball scrimmages. I'm sure he's going to have Ethan Petrie-like performances, just taking batting practice out there. So, but yeah, those are my three guys. Collyn, who are you looking at?
Austin Brendling is really, really interesting to me because they just didn't have – last year South Carolina struggled to really have that prototypical leadoff guy. And Will McGillis he settled the position down. But when you look at Will McGillis, when you look at his skill set, he wasn't a true leadoff guy. So when you talk about Austin Brendling, who had an OPS of, he got on base at a 500 clip, had a 540 slugging percentage, scored 60 runs for you, that gives you a table setter. That gives you a guy to get on base, maybe steal some bags, put pressure on defense, play in center field if they need him to, and really just be a guy, just a guy that can table set for you. Obviously, Kennedy Jones is Kennedy Jones. Dude. Here's the thing. You're talking about a top four in your lineup. That could be Austin Brendling with an OPS of 1.040, which is good, which is really good.
Pretty good.
Who scored 60 runs. Your number two hitter, playing in left, more than likely, is Kennedy Jones, who got on base at a 445 clip and slugged almost 600 with 43 RBI and 46 runs scored. Pretty good. Your number three hole hitter playing right field is Ethan Petrie. And your cleanup hitter batting fourth and playing catcher is Cole Messina. That is, and then maybe a Billy Amick. Then maybe Gavin Casas. That's a terrifying 1 through 6. And then that's not even including a Carson Horning. That's not even including a Talmadge LeCroy. That's not even including I'm trying to think of some other guys. Just it's a really, really talented stock of offensive players. And Blake Jackson, another one that I think could make an impact. Left-handed hitter. They didn't have enough of those over the course of the season. High on base guy. I mean, had an OPS of, if I'm doing quick math in my head, that's what 846, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
Needs to cut down on the strikeouts, had a pretty high strikeout rate, but drove in 28, had 5 home runs, was playing really well at the end of the year too, which helps with that. The pitcher outside of Ty Good, who obviously could, factor in a couple of different ways to the South Carolina staff, Tyler Dean is a former top 100 recruit coming out of high school. Never really clicked at Virginia Tech for whatever reason, but has like a fastball that's up in the mid 90s on it. If you can clean up mechanics, if you can clean up some other stuff, has a chance to come in and pitch real innings out of a bullpen, which is what you need in the SEC. So when you talk about a guy like that, I think there's a high ceiling there if he can figure it out and click. And there's obviously something South Carolina saw there that they liked, and it'll be interesting to see how he kind of clicks. But all of those guys will make an impact at some point next season. Obviously, Gainey, a lefty who can come in and get outs. Obviously, Dean, Ty Good, all of those guys. But you're talking about a few guys who have a chance to be really, just dudes in this lineup and on this pitching staff. And they ain't done. They ain't done by a long shot in the portal. And it's going to be interesting to see how things wrap up, both on the mound and at the plate. But if I know one thing in talking to #sources, they ain't done. They really, really, really ain't done.
No, and I feel like baseball, it's a lot like football. I mean, Mike and I talked about it last night. They're far from over. The 2024 class, I think, is baseball recruiting class is more of the same. They have the potential to really, really go out there and make the transfer class better than last year's, right? Like, I know we were coming into last season saying, wow, this transfer class, like Kingston did some work. Like, I don't think anyone really expected him to do as well as he did in the portal last season or going into last season. So I think this season, it's just, like I said, it all builds on itself. And then when you have, we all know Monty Lee, like it's hard to tell Monty Lee no, especially when he's giving the hard pitch as well. So I think him and Kingston it's a dynamic duo when it comes to recruiting guys. But Collyn, before we get into all of the potentials, I want to talk about another title presenting sponsor, our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Taxiety is that uncertain feeling you get right before doing your taxes, but you don't have to go through it alone. The tax team at Liberty Tax in Irmo, Lexington, and Columbia will walk you through the process, clear up any confusion, and guarantee you'll get the biggest possible refund or your money back. It's tax time. If you're in a hurry for your refund, call the tax team at Liberty Tax. Fast, accurate, and guaranteed. On the other hand, if you think you might be owing Sam, talk to the Liberty Tax team to make sure you're not paying more than you should owe. They'll find every possible deduction for you. Locally owned and operated, staffed by tax professionals in your neighborhood. Open 9 to 9 on weekdays, 9 to 5 on Saturdays with multiple service options. Start through the Liberty Tax mobile app or through the desktop portal. Make an appointment or just walk in. Give a call to upload your tax documents. And when you come in, your return will be ready to review and sign. Give them a call at 803-462-5576. Once again, 803-462-5576 for all of your tax needs. Fun stuff.
You want to talk portal?
Yeah, we can do that.
There's the big fish out there.
One big fish, yeah.
There's a few guys that they're recruiting that would be really good lands for South Carolina, but Billy Amick, the one everyone wants to talk about. Billy Amick. What would it mean? Now, South Carolina, to get it out of the way, very firmly in his recruitment. I would consider them probably one of the 2 or 3 schools that are at the top of the heap, top of the pack. Obviously, committed to Clemson to play for Monty Lee. Left after a year when Monty Lee was not there. Talking about a guy who brings some real juice, a really good bat. South Carolina kid. You're going to have to compete with some other big SEC programs to really, really land this guy. But in South Carolina was up in the Cape and visited with him up there. So all of that said, we'll have more on that tonight, tomorrow, as I kind of glean some information. What would it mean for South Carolina to land a guy like Amick? Not just perception-wise, who cares? I mean, perception is one thing. But just from an on-field perspective, what would it mean for South Carolina to be able to go out and land a guy like Amick?
I think it's huge. I think Amick, in my eyes, is the hottest transfer in college baseball right now. He's the name to go get. And like Collyn said, you're going to be competing with a lot of SEC programs. If you can go get him, I think he's the crowning jewel of this transfer portal class. If you can go get him, absolute stud. You can put him anywhere, really, in the infield. And as we know, there's a couple positions that you do need to fill in the infield that you're looking at. I think Amick can fill any one of those. Just an absolute stud. Slashed 418, 464, and 778 with a 450 BAIP and a 16.8 K percentage with 36 runs, 58 RBIs, and 12 homers. I think obviously the homers are going to go up. Founders Park is a hitter's ballpark.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's going to be fun to see if you can add another bat like Billy Amick. Obviously we talked about the Kennedy Joneses in this class. Billy Amick he's that dude. He's the piece de resistance, if you will, in this class. And if you can get him, man, this team is looking like a powerhouse for next year. I mean, obviously it's way too early to say Omaha or bust, but you get a guy like that, man, it's going to be pretty easy to make that make that statement come, April, May next year.
Yeah, and with Amick, it's one of those things where this offense is play games and do all that, but when you talk about adding a guy like Amick who's going to hit, fourth, fifth, sixth in the order, that makes your lineup that much longer because it means Gavin Costas is hitting sixth instead of you just make that lineup so much deeper. It allows you to play him at third. It allows Talmadge LeCroy to kind of shift and bounce around from spot to spot that they need him at. Anytime you can add someone who slugged over 770 in the college season and got on basically a 464 clip and was an All-American, pretty daggum good. But to go along with that, you add pop, but you don't forsake it for average. The guy who obviously hit 12 homers, just a stud and someone that when you look back 2 weeks ago, the top three, the big three were Kennedy Jones, Shelton from Alabama, and Billy Amick. So getting one of the three was an absolute pipe dream. It was probably going to be hard to swing to get all three. Fair, and easy. One's good. Yep. Two would be just a dream come true for South Carolina, and that's what they have a chance to do with Amick. And they're up there right now. And with Amick, they're also recruiting a couple other middle infielders. They're recruiting, obviously, Parker Nolan's a name that's popped up today. We'll see what ultimately comes from all of that, but their middle infield is their kind of next step as they kind of try to round this. They've already restocked their outfield, bringing in Brundling, Jackson, and Jones. But now they got to restock and kind of retool that infield, losing Wimmer, losing McGillis. And they have a chance to really do it with Amick and a couple other guys that they're recruiting in the portal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the infield is kind of the main priority right now. Obviously, you do have a couple holes in your starting pitching. A lot of guys are going to be leaving, and relief pitching as well. But they do have, obviously, Ty Good probably going to be one of your starters, or at least compete for it.
Yeah, he'll be in the competition to start on the weekend. Nothing set in stone, but he'll compete for a starting job on the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I think Garrett Gainey's going to be a big addition to this bullpen. I think he's going to surprise some people, maybe come into the Eli Jones role a little bit, not necessarily starting games, but kind of how Eli was out of the pen towards the start of the year. And obviously Eli was a little shaky then, but I digress. I think Garrett Gainey is he's one of your first pieces towards that bullpen, and you still need a couple more names, but your main priority right now is Billy Amick. If you can get him, and then everything else kind of comes after that. I think if you can land a guy like Amick, you can also say hey, our roster is now officially stacked for next year. Who doesn't want to be a part of this? So I think Amick might even be a little bit of a recruiting pitch in a way, as well as Kennedy Jones and the rest of these guys, and how you've already retooled your roster. So exciting stuff. That's for sure.
They need pitching, point blank, and they got a few freshmen that can come in and make an impact, but they really need to go out and get maybe another guy who can compete for a starting job. Your three leading candidates would be a Roman Kimball, and Eli Jones, and Matthew Becker, Ty Good, maybe a Veach or a Williamson or someone like that could sneak into it, but those guys seem more like bullpen arms right now. You probably need another reliever or two or three, and then maybe another guy who can come in and step up and compete for starter innings, because that's kind of the next step as you look towards. I think they're going to have to replace over 60% of the innings, 60% of the strikeouts, 80-something% of your starts. You're having to really restock that pitching staff. There's a good core, but you really have to go, and they're recruiting a couple guys out of Tennessee who recently hopped in the portal. They're recruiting Obviously, Central Connecticut State's Dominic Niemann, I believe is how you say his name. He was on campus for a visit yesterday and today, I believe he arrived yesterday maybe. So he was that Central Connecticut State guy who South Carolina fans were very glad they did not see in a regional.
Dude in that rotation.
Yes. And so your hope, that's a feasible get. If you can get him, he can compete for starter innings, and then you go about restocking a bullpen. But the attention, there's still a few big fish to land offensively, but now you really got to look towards restocking a pitching staff that still has, again, a good young core, but some questions around what that staff's going to look like, what it's going to be heading into 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this upcoming year is going to be a little bit different than last year. I feel like last year you kind of had your idea of who your weekend rotation is going to be. This year it's going to be a little different because I know the batting order was a little bit kind of clustered all over the place. You weren't sure who was going to be a dude necessarily going into fall ball. I think it's kind of the opposite. You don't necessarily know who's going to be your weekend starters going into it. But, I mean, we've seen what this pitching staff can do. It's going to be really interesting. See who comes out of it.
Yeah, and they'll have a new pitching coach.
Yes.
As well, because Justin Parker has left to go to Mississippi State, and Matt Williams is officially in from Liberty, where he spent, what was that? 2020 was his first year, so 3 full seasons, 21, 22, and 23. Up at Liberty, was at UNCW for a very long time, incredibly tied in at the state level here. Recruited South Carolina pretty heavily, recruited the portal fairly well as well. A good get for South Carolina. Obviously, Mississippi State offered Justin Parker a very good sum of money to go there. South Carolina couldn't counter with that or didn't, and how that contract negotiations worked. We'll never know. We were never in the room. But Matt Williams comes in. I kind of agree with Kendall Rogers. He tweeted out when it happened, Justin Parker to Mississippi State and Matt Williams to South Carolina certainly feels like both sides kind of walk away from this happy and happy with their current conditions. And I agree. Yeah, I think that's a very fair take. And Matt Williams, oddly enough, made multiple postseasons. And every time he did at UNCW, I believe, they wound up playing South Carolina in a regional final. He was part of 2 regional final teams at UNCW that played South Carolina in 16 and 18, and both seasons were ended by South Carolina. And I think that speaks honestly to the testament he did at UNCW, where they were an elite pitching staff for a very long time. And he goes to Liberty, and they immediately become one of the better mid-major, especially in I believe it's the ASUN, one of the better pitching staffs in the ASUN point-blank period, and has a track record of immediate success at schools, which is good for South Carolina, especially in the portal age, to go out there and land some guys. So certainly encouraging hire, and now you hit the ground running. I know he's already going out and evaluating guys, looking in the portal to see, what South Carolina can bring in. And now it's just about, like we talked about, restocking that room and restocking that staff, because you have some questions. There's a lot of unknowns. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's going to be bad. It's just unknown what this pitching staff, top to bottom, can be. The top end with your Eli Joneses, your Beckers, your Veaches, your Austins. Now, how does it fill out? How can you make this one of the best pitching staffs in the country as you look ahead to trying to get to Omaha? But a very, very good hire from everyone I've talked to about Matt Williams and about what he can do for South Carolina once he, really hits the ground running here in Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also impressed with the Matt Williams hire. Like you said, I think it's kind of a win-win. I'm happy for Justin Parker. Go get that bag. I mean, he's done a lot at South Carolina in his time here. And Matt Williams is kind of stepping in to almost kind of a clean slate, really, with kind of how we were saying this pitching staff looks. He kind of gets to make this pitching staff his own. A lot of fresh arms, a lot of new guys, and yet that you still have that core. So a chance for Matt Williams to make his impact early as a pitching coach. And again, I think it's a really, really good get. His staffs at Liberty were some of the best, not only in the ASUN, like Collyn said, but also in Division I. I can remember looking at pitching statistics and Liberty always being up there. So really, really good get for South Carolina and Matt Williams.
Yeah, and now they kind of turn their attention to this third assistant that gets to start taking over. I believe it's July 1, and all signs are obviously we're pointing to Joey Holcomb being officially named as South Carolina's third assistant. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But a guy who with another long track record at UNCG, where he was there with Link Jarrett of Notre Dame notoriety, went to the College World Series in 2021 with NC State. He was one of the hitting coaches up there when the Pac-9 went on that run and should have probably played for a national championship series if COVID didn't hit that team hard. Then he goes to Campbell. In 2 seasons with Campbell, they hit over 300. And that Campbell team this year, he was in charge of really help coordinate that offense. That Campbell team was a wagon.
So good.
Yeah. Just when you talk about dudes who just hit up and down the order, that was one of them. And I think it'll be a really good addition to pair with Monty Lee, who is staying at South Carolina, who had some overtures, especially from Cincinnati, to go be their head coach and chose to stay at South Carolina instead. Cincinnati was a place that was interviewed him, was a place that, looked hard at Monty Lee. And if that's a win for South Carolina to keep a guy like that in there. And not only that, but to pair him with Holcomb, who has a chance to be another high major assistant one day too. And there's a lot of criticism that can be levied at Mark Kingston from time to time. He hires really good staffs. Billy Mole was his pitching coach at South Florida. Billy Mole is the head coach at South Florida. Mike Current was his recruiting coordinator there, and when he took the job at South Carolina. Current's in an off-the-field role now, but was in charge of helping put together the recruiting class that included Danny Lloyd. He helped re-recruit him, essentially. Andy Peters, Will Sanders, Jack Mahoney, a lot of those pieces, Brady Allen, a lot of those pieces that South Carolina had early on that were productive weren't a lot of what Mike Current helped build. So that's one of them. And then obviously Skylar Mead's a head coach. Justin Parker is a future head coach. Mm-hmm. Chad Kaye was a very hot assistant at the time when Mark Kingston hired him. Monty is Monty. I think he'll be a head coach at some point in his career again. So you're talking about a group that he's done well hiring, and I think this is another really, really, really solid staff on his end. Yeah, absolutely. And I really love – I'm slipping on the guy's name from Campbell. Joey Holcomb or Brian.
Yep. Yeah. I've been caught up in football recruiting, so I apologize. Mike has had me full Mike and Wes and Chris too. I've been over at camp and stuff, and that's been all fun. But Joey Holcomb, that Campbell team was the best offense in college baseball in my eyes. Just to see what they had been able to do, and it had kind of built up to what they were this year. Really, really, really fun offense to watch. I felt like every other week their home run numbers would just go up and up and up and up and up and up. So Holcomb's going to be huge, and then pair him with a character like Monty Lee. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you're going to see results instantly. I think we're going to see. It's hard to say that you're going to see more firepower than you saw this season, but I mean, with the transfers that you're bringing in, Kennedy Jones, if you can get Billy and Nick, it's going to be really, really, really hard to doubt the Gamecocks. And again, April, May, come time for postseason predictions. Yeah, I mean, this is a team that you're restocking in a big way offensively. Again, like we talked about pitching, there's questions there. There's pieces, and then there's still a lot of room to grow and what you're doing in the pitching staff perspective. But you're talking about a guy in Holcomb, looking at his overall numbers over the course of, his tenure, just recruited guy after guy after guy. And, Campbell hit .318 this year as a team with a .439 on base percentage.
NC State hit over 300 in the COVID year before things got snapped. A ton of his UNCG teams hit over 300. And it's really interesting because when you look back, it's kind of transitioned where at UNCG, they did a lot of small ball. They were bunting a ton. They were, just trying to get on base and manufacture some runs. And, as things progressed and the competition got stiffer and the game changed a little bit, he started hitting home runs. Campbell hit, 123 home runs this year. It was power happy, and he's shown an ability to kind of to tailor his teams and what his offenses are working with to what they do best. And Monty did that really well this year too. So I think having those two guys together is a really good sign for South Carolina, what it can accomplish next year, especially at the plate. And on paper, it's a top half of the SEC offense. It might be top 4 or 5, not knowing what everyone else is obviously going to do in the portal. So fireworks is what this offense can be next year if everything goes to plan. Fireworks.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
But I don't
Intern Joe?
Yeah.
I think we're playing.
Yeah, I was gonna say we don't really have any questions. We talked about the Parker Nolan rumors. That's still obviously a developing story. If you want more on that, Collyn will have plenty more of it. He's on top of it. There's plenty.
I have to send some text messages tonight. So yes.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight and for all of this season. It's been a blast. Obviously, like I said, we'll try to get some foul balls in there. Try to get some off-season interviews when these guys are really available. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to put that together and have some fun stuff planned for the fall. But thank you guys for tuning in. It's been a blast. Obviously, Jack couldn't be here, but I know he sends his thank you as well. So yeah, much appreciated. And you guys have a good rest of your Wednesday night.